Part 11. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 101. After a little incident on Zhuangyuan Street, Su Buling returned to the carriage. Ms. Lu was worried that the poison would prevent Su Buling from using force, so she put on an unhappy look on her face and lectured her for a long time, saying that the prince of the feudal lord should stay behind the scenes and so on. However, after being in contact with Su Buling for a long time, it was obvious that Ms. Lu was not angry at all, and even a little proud. Daio's men who are good at martial arts and capable of fighting have always been admired and favored by others, even if Ms. Lu was born into a scholarly family. After the carriage arrived at Xianzizai on Zhuangyuan Street, Su Buling accompanied Ms. Lu for half an hour. 90% of the people who came to Xianzizai were ladies, including princesses, and many of them were onlookers. Su Buling had the most headache of the feeling of being a vase, so he could only keep a cold face and say nothing. He walked around with Ms. Lu and took advantage of Ms. Lu's surprise to buy 2 boxes of red orchid flowers before heading back home. Ms. Lu has been a widow at home for many years. After going out to go shopping, she was in a much better mood. She was no longer obsessed with Su Buletinling entering the palace. She just told her to just eat and not talk, not to be too easygoing, not to collect things, and not to allow her to go to the palace. Write poetry. After waiting and so on, Su Buling was let go. Su Buling came out of Ms. Lu's room and felt that her legs were weak. The thought of another tough battle at night makes me feel a little headache. But as a man, you have to fight it all alone. Su Buling was too embarrassed to complain, so he took the small gift box and got on the carriage that the Queen Mother took to pick people up, and drove around to Changle Palace. The days are short in winter, and night falls quietly after dusk. The Chinese New Year is just a few days away. Although there are not many people living in Changle Palace, it is decorated meticulously. Red palace lanterns are hung all over the eaves and verandas, and it looks like a sea of lanterns at a glance at night. Su Buling came to the vicinity of the Queen Mother's palace and looked up. The scenery was very different from a few days ago. I don't know where the Queen Mother got a bunch of potted plants. There were hundreds of them and placed them in the original garden. In the cold winter, in the 12th lunar month, it looks a bit desolate when it's bare. Although Su Buling couldn't tell what kind of plants were planted in the pots, but with a little thought, he could guess that the Queen Mother was inspired by that poem and planted a garden full of daisies in the garden, waiting for the fragrance array to reach the sky on September 8 next year. Through Chang'an scene. It's only the 12th lunar month, so it's obviously a bit early. Su Buling shook his head secretly, feeling that the Queen Mother was a bit childish. Walking through the corridors and buildings, before reaching the main hall, I saw the Queen Mother coming out. The Queen Mother wore a bright red palace dress. The gold thread on the skirt outlined complicated patterns. She trembled slightly as she walked. She was graceful and majestic, but she also had a mature charm from time to time. The belt tied her waist just right, making her look like a gourd. Her figure is almost flawless. Xiao Buletinling, come here quickly. The Queen Mother smiled brightly, raised her finger and hooked it. Su Buletinling politely bowed to a junior and followed the Queen Mother's footsteps with the box in hand. Where did the Queen Mother bring so many flower pots? The Queen Mother smiled gently and nodded, and looked at the newly tidied courtyard with satisfaction. The Holy Emperor's harem used to be hidden in the deep palace and no one appreciated it. It was a pity, so she moved it here. When the chrysanthemums in this palace are in full bloom, don't let me come over and enjoy it. Su Buling smiled softly. That's natural, the Queen Mother's anus, well, I think it's very beautiful. Entering the main court during the chat, the Queen Mother had obviously been waiting for a long time. The small table was ready, with warm wine beside it and candlesticks placed around it, making the splendid main hall feel a bit more warm. The queen mother sat down on the main seat, stretched her legs under the table as usual, stepped on the stove, clapped her hands, and the palace maid came up carrying various delicacies. Su Buling was familiar with the road. After sitting next to him, he also put his feet in. The next step was to push the cup and change the cup. Because this trip had a purpose, Su Buling was very easygoing and talkative at the wine table. From the Xiao family's past achievements to Xiao's resume over the years, even Xiao Ting racked his brains to think of some good points and praised a few words. The queen mother liked it. Listen to what you say. Su Buling's appearance was naturally cold, and his speech had a royal bearing. There was no hint of flattery, and it was as if he was telling the truth slowly. Of course, except for Xiao Ting's matter, everything else is indeed true. The queen mother was naturally happy. She didn't interrupt until the end. She raised her eyebrows and raised her cheeks with her hands, looking intently at Su Buling and flattering her. When Su Buling got up, he raised his glass and drank it all in one gulp. The queen mother filled it herself. Because Su Buling relied on strong wine to suppress the poison, there was no need to say drink less. Halfway through the meal, the prepared wine was actually finished, and the palace maid quickly brought 2 more jars of palace wine. The night is getting darker. Outside the courtyard of Jinghua Yuan, Mrs. Lu walked back and forth with her hands folded on her waist, sometimes looking at the majestic imperial city in the distance. She had come out countless times. Mrs. Lu was very happy because she went shopping at noon. When she came back, she was playing with rouge and gouache in the house. It's just that Mrs. Lu's heart was set on Su Buling after all, and she asked the maid to go out from time to time to see if Su Buling had returned to the palace. From the time it got dark to the time when the lanterns were first lit, and then from the time when the lanterns were first lit up until the city was completely silent, Su Buling never left the palace until he saw the palace gate closing. Mrs. Lu couldn't sit still any longer. All sorts of thoughts came to her mind, and she became more and more panicked as it got darker. Ling nothing will happen to you. The more Mrs. Lu thought about it, the more something was wrong. She stamped her embroidered shoes and wanted to call a carriage to enter the palace. Yunu knows Mrs. Lu's temperament and is a bit suspicious. But if Ling is not in the palace, what can happen? Can he still be eaten by the queen mother? Madam, please go back and rest. Your Majesty knows what's appropriate and nothing will happen to you. But Mrs. Lu pursed her lips. Some words were difficult to say after all. She raised her eyes and looked in the direction of Changal Palace. She hesitated for a long time. She had no reason to enter the palace, so she had to reluctantly turn back and walk towards the courtyard. The red lights outside the window are like the sea, and the palace lights inside the pavilion are like beans. The already deserted Changnian palace seemed to liven up with the addition of a man. The palace maid secretly stood outside the door and window, listening to the cold and magnetic voice. Time passed little by little, and the night was getting darker. Logically speaking, the banquet should be over. Seeing that Su Buling didn't drink well, the queen mother naturally didn't urge her. She just felt that Su Buling had a great capacity for drinking. She was about to praise him a few times, but unexpectedly she saw Su Buling, who was looking tipsy, and burped, "The queen mother is so drunk, the wine is really good, it's time to go home." Then he staggered about to get up, but with a pop, he fell backwards on the carpet. The queen mother was stunned for a moment, then slightly startled, and hurriedly crawled from the carpet to Su Buling. He lowered his head and looked at it for a few times, then pressed Su Buling's wrist and felt it. The pulse was stable and there was no abnormality, and then he felt a little relieved. The palace maid hurried in and asked, "Queen mother, what's wrong with the young prince?" "I'm drunk, it's okay. I thought I could drink 1,000 cups, but I didn't expect that I would drink and fall down." The queen mother sat sideways on the carpet, leaned over and took a few glances, feeling a little funny, maybe because she had drunk some wine, she actually raised her hand and pinched the bridge of Su Buling's nose. This action was naturally inappropriate. Chiao Yi lightly held her skirt and squatted down beside her, and whispered, "Queen Mother, Prince Su is very arrogant. If he finds out, he will be angry. He was drunk and unconscious, and he didn't know." The Queen Mother was finally able to look at her openly, without being polite at all, and carefully looked at Su Buling's face. "Prince Su is of average length, how could he give birth to such a good-looking son? This palace is jealous just looking at it. It would be great if Xiaoting was also so good-looking." Seeing her master being so presumptuous, Chiao Yi naturally stopped trying to dissuade her. She moved closer together and glanced down at her. "Princess Su is a rare beauty. It's normal for a man to resemble his mother. If the Queen Mother is..." She said this. Chiao Yi quickly shut up. After all, the Queen Mother could not have children. The Queen Mother did not pay attention to the maid. She looked at it for a moment and sighed quietly. "It's a pity that it's not a girl's family. I still like girls." Chiao Yi pursed her lips and raised her hand to touch Su Buling's face, but unfortunately she was immediately slapped by the Queen Mother and quickly retracted. "Prince Su is no worse than a girl. If the Queen Mother likes it, why don't you get a condom? Here comes the skirt." The prince dressed in women's clothing? Princess Su's beauty in the prosperous age? Su Buling's hand, which was covered by the hem of the Queen Mother's skirt, tightened slightly. The Queen Mother's wine-scented breath sprayed on her cheeks. She was obviously very close and couldn't make any strange expressions. Fortunately, the Queen Mother was not that drunk yet. She frowned slightly and glared at Chiao Yi. "Nonsense, send the prince to rest." Chiao Yi hesitated slightly. "Queen Mother, the palace door is about to close." The Queen Mother looked a little impatient. "This is not the holy harem. The noble prince cannot be thrown out of the imperial city when he is drunk. If outsiders know about it, he must not poke me in the back and say that I have not fulfilled my duty as an elder. Send the prince away. Go down and prepare some sobering soup." "Promise." Naturally, Chiao Yi did not dare to say anything, so she called the palace maids, and together they carried Su Buling, who was unconscious, to the side hall. Several palace maids worked together to lift Su Buling, opened the door, lifted the quilt, and placed Su Buling on the bed. Seeing the handsome and unconscious young prince, the maids breathed a sigh of relief and their hearts boiled with excitement. "It's done tonight. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 102. In the side hall, Su Buling breathed steadily, and the whispers of several palace maids echoed in his ears. "Sister Chiao Yi, Prince Su is so handsome, much better looking than the second young master Xiao. In comparison, the second young master Xiao looks like a monkey that just came down from a tree. Don't let the Queen Dowager hear you, otherwise you won't be able to leave the palace in your next life." He, didn't the Queen Dowager tell us to sleep with her? No. Don't have any bad ideas. If you sneak onto the prince's bed tonight and the prince is unhappy tomorrow, don't even think about staying in Changle Palace, let alone going to Suzhou with him. Alas, what a pity. Otherwise, Sister Chiao Yi, ask him, maybe the little prince wants you. Chirp, chirp. Su Buling felt someone reaching out to him. It should be the Empress Dowager's personal maid Chiao Yi. While she was unbuttoning her robe, she leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Young prince, do you want me to arrange a bed warmer for you?" Chiao Yi was able to enter the palace with him because she was used to serve the emperor when his master was not convenient. She was carefully selected and trained by the aristocratic family since she was young, and her appearance and temperament were not bad. It is estimated that she knew that she would accompany the Empress Dowager to die alone in the future, and she met Su Buling, so she was instigated by the palace maid to have some small thoughts. Su Buling was not a heartless monk. He was a little itchy by Chiao Yi's seductive tone, but he had something important to do tonight, so he naturally couldn't appreciate it. He had to put on an appearance of "I like to kill people in my dreams," snorted coldly, and turned over drunkenly to face the inside. Qiao Yi was startled and dared not speak again. She turned back and glared at the palace maids who gave bad ideas, then she retreated with a red face and closed the door. The house became quiet, and the footsteps gradually faded away. Su Buling covered himself with the quilt, pretending to be asleep, and patiently waited for the alcohol to pass. During this time, a palace maid came in and looked at him for a few times, then went out. The Queen Mother seemed to come once, holding his wrist to feel his pulse, and then left. About 2 hours later, it was past midnight. The sparsely populated Changal Palace was completely silent, with only the whoosh sound of the cold wind blowing through the palace. Su Buling's drunkenness also disappeared. He opened his eyes, sat up silently from the bed, untied the belt around his waist, took off the white robe, revealing a dark nightgown inside, and took out the black cloth and the human skin mask. The human skin mask is a disguise used by the underworld, but the real one has long been lost. Now all you can get is a piece of skin that can be pasted on the face, which looks like a piece of yellow cloth. After putting on a crude mask, Su Buling covered his face with a black cloth, took off his boots and wore only black cloth socks, locked the door and cleaned up the traces of the bedding, then opened the window of the room and jumped out silently. Daewoo relied on military power to build the country, and there were many masters. The best of them could not be stopped by a palace wall. If there were no strong men guarding the palace, Ning Qingyi could enter the palace and kill the emperor and leave. Su Buling didn't know how many masters were hidden in the imperial city, but the king of a country must have a stronger appeal than the Suwang mansion. The Suwang had dozens of retainers under his command, and it was not uncommon for hundreds of masters to emerge in the imperial city, so he was very careful. Changal Palace was the residence of the Empress Dowager. It was sparsely populated and the location was not important, but the Empress Dowager's status was here. If she was caught by a flower thief, the emperor would probably have to commit suicide to apologize to the late emperor, so there must be masters hiding in the dark. If it were an ordinary Jianghu, he would definitely not dare to sneak around like this, but Su Buling was obviously not an ordinary person. At the age of 16, he was famous for his martial arts, and it was not just talk. Although he was poisoned and could not use his energy and his fighting power was only 1/10 of what it was obvious that sneaking did not require much strength, and he relied on his perception and alertness. Su Buling was like a ghost, and his toes stepped on the snow without making any sound. He moved like the wind in the dark, gradually passing through the Qianbu corridor connected to the harem, and from time to time he glanced at the top of the Taiji Hall in the distance, where a lucky beast squatted for many years, overlooking everything in the imperial city. There were many rumors about eunuchia in the Jianghu, such as immortality, killing people like flies, practicing evil skills with babies, etc. He had a very bad reputation and was almost a standard template for the evil villain in chivalrous stories. However, according to Su Buling's understanding, eunuchia has never left the imperial city alone. Wherever the emperor is, he is there. He shouts once in court and once again after court. The rest of the time he stands on the roof, and he probably has no time to deal with people from the underworld. As for how good eunuchya's martial arts are, there are different opinions. No one has ever seen eunuchya take action, and those who have seen it probably have no chance to tell others. As the saying goes, there is no false person under a great reputation. According to Su Buling's estimation, when eunuchya was young, he was definitely the top warrior in Daewoo. Now that he is old, it is hard to say whether his martial arts have regressed or improved. After all, fists are afraid of young people, and sticks are afraid of old wolves. It is difficult to make a conclusion about a person's martial arts attainments based on age alone. While Su Buling was carefully observing, he had already passed through the Qianbu corridor from the dark and entered the harem. The palace complex in the harem is very large, with thousands of palace maids and the emperor's concubines living there, and there are also many eunuchs. At this time, there are many people on night shift, and people can be seen walking around faintly. The reputation of the Emperor Songji for his diligence was known to all officials. He usually stayed in the imperial study and rarely came to the harem. He should be in the imperial study tonight. Su Buling moved quickly between the palace and the courtyard. His speed was not fast, but his goal was clear. After Daio conquered Chang'an, he directly moved into the former palace of Daki and did not rebuild it. Most of the buildings in the imperial city have existed for hundreds of years. The location of each room is not a secret. Su Buling has memorized it thoroughly in the past few days. Since Jia Yi was guarding Lichun Hall, he must have lived in it. Lichun Hall was the residence of the queen, located in the center of the harem, and should have been as important as the emperor's residence. However, Queen Kui died of illness a few years ago, and Songji had always refused to re-establish a queen, so Lichun Hall was still Queen Kui's former residence, and no other concubines dared to move in without permission. Su Buling came to the vicinity of Lichun Hall, listened carefully to the surrounding movements, and after confirming that there was no one, he flashed across the outer wall and entered. Compared with the palaces of other concubines, Lichun Hall was much more deserted, and even had a sense of depression in the cold winter. There were no red lanterns hanging, but strips of white silk were hung between the flying eaves and corridors. There was no figure, but it was not gloomy. Su Buling looked carefully for a few times, and found that every corner of Lichun Hall was spotless, without even snow. The courtyard was full of peach trees, and white flowers were tied on the bare peach branches. Even in the winter, it was like being in a peach forest. The paper flowers tied to the peach branches were spotless and new, not eroded by the wind and snow. It seemed that they were tied not long ago. I am afraid that they would be changed every few days, and Queen Kui had been dead for 4 or 5 years. Thinking of this, Su Buling could not help but secretly admire the infatuation of the current emperor. The two biggest regrets in the world are watching heroes grow old and watching beauties grow old. And the saddest thing in the world is dying before fulfilling ambitions, and dying before being old. Compared with the former sigh of time, the latter is often more unforgettable. The most admired and obsessed person in the heart suddenly stopped at the most glorious moment of his life, leaving regrets and grief to the living, which those who have not experienced it cannot understand at all. Daio Jianghu still misses the Suanhe Kui of the previous generation. It is not that there are really no beauties in the world, but the sad endings of beauties fall into the eyes, just like the Red Mansion, which makes people feel sad every time they think of it. Su Buling had heard Lao Xiao talk about the Jianghu stories of the past. In the storyteller's mouth, Kui Zioan, the daughter of the Kui family in Yuzhu, was a bookish beauty who was fragile, sickly, and worried. She did not have the deeds of the chivalrous women in the Jianghu, nor the fame of the officials. Since she was 14 years old, she has been staying in the peach garden of the Kui family. She is 3 parts shy and 7 parts delicate, and never goes out. Originally, the Jianghu market did not know that the Kui family had such a beauty hidden, until one day Su Danking, who liked to play Jianghu, rashly broke into the peach blossom forest to enjoy the scenery. At a glance, he was shocked by her beauty. It is said that countless Kui family guests rushed with knives, but what they saw was Su Danking holding rice paper in one hand and a brush in the other, chasing the Kui family daughter in the peach forest, and kept shouting, "Wait until I finish painting and then kill me." After hearing that it was Su Danking, the head of the Kui family felt sorry for his talent and was reluctant to kill him. He drove Su Danking away from the peach blossom forest after he finished painting, and took the painting away. Su Danking was a wanderer with a strange personality and was very demanding about his paintings. After escaping death, he not only did not learn his lesson, but instead felt that the hasty painting in the peach blossom forest was a failure. He risked being hunted down and killed by the Kui family and secretly painted 2 more paintings. Unfortunately, they were not as good as the one in the peach forest. In the end, he sighed, "It's better to die in the peach blossom forest." It was because of Su Danking's words that Kui Zioan's name became famous overnight, to the point that everyone knew it. Countless wanderers and literary talents came to the Kui family to propose marriage, almost squeezing through the memorial archway of the Yuzhu Kui family. This craze gradually faded until the words of Miss Tang of Yuzhu, "It's hard to paint a beautiful woman in the world." Daughters of aristocratic families would never marry into a poor family, and most of them were arranged marriages between families of equal status. Later, the previous emperor passed away, and the new emperor ascended the throne, and needed a queen who would rule the country. The court officials were looking for a daughter among the legitimate daughters of the aristocratic families, and originally had their eyes on Miss Tang, who was praised as the national beauty of the ages. The Tang family was originally a family of rivers and lakes with a long history, but after serving Dayo for many years, it gradually evolved into a family of generals. Its status in Dayo cannot be underestimated, and this move can also officially make the Tang family a top family. Unfortunately, the sky did not fulfill people's wishes. After the wedding team arrived at the Tang family, they found that Miss Tang had escaped from the marriage and disappeared. The consequences of escaping the emperor's marriage can be imagined. The head of the Tang family was furious. While apologizing to the court, he drove this unfilial daughter out of the house and sent people to hunt her down until Miss Tang hid and ran to the foot of Wudane Mountain to become a Taoist nun, and was protected by Wudane Mountain and escaped. The new emperor had already ascended the throne, and all the civil and military officials in the court were waiting for the wedding. The wedding envoy could not carry an empty sedan back. Seeing this, the nearby Kui family sent Kui Zioan to the sedan and she became the queen of Dayo. There were few rumors about what happened afterwards. The next time we heard about Kui Zioan was the imperial edict of the court. Queen Kui became ill due to long-term treatment and died in the Deep Palace. And the Emperor of Dayo has been devoted to government affairs all day since then. He rarely goes to the harem and has not appointed another queen. Su Buling saw the peach blossoms in the garden, and he didn't know what to say except sighing. Tap tap. When Su Buling was thinking, a barely audible footstep suddenly appeared. He was startled and quickly hid in the dark. He looked up and saw a eunuch in a red robe, holding a white lantern, walking slowly through the corridor of the palace. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 103. Dong. Dong. The deep morning bell rang from the bell and drum tower of the Imperial College, and the sound of reading aloud was like a tide. In the courtyard behind the Imperial College, Song Yu stood in front of the painting table in the peach blossom forest, sketching a picture of a beauty on the peach branch in front of him. Sometimes he crumpled the rice paper on the painting table into a ball and threw it into the waste basket beside him. It was not because he was impatient, but simply because he was not satisfied with the painting. When he threw an unknown number of papers, the ball of paper accidentally hit the edge of the bamboo basket, bounced and fell under the peach tree. A breeze rose quietly. A snow-white hand appeared in the peach forest, picked up the ball of paper and put it back into the bamboo basket. Song Yu raised his eyes, and he didn't know when a middle-aged man appeared in front of him. He had no beard on his chin and a handsome face, but there was lingering sadness between his eyebrows, and he looked a little more old. Jia Yi, long time no see. Your Majesty. Jia Yi, wearing a white scholar's robe, looked at the scroll under the peach branches, but after a quick glance, he turned away and walked slowly into the tea house. Song Yu continued to paint the scroll until he stopped writing again out of dissatisfaction, then put down his brush, walked slowly into the tea house, sat on the ground in front of Jia Yi, and fiddled with the tea set on the small stove. Jia Yi was taciturn, just sitting upright. Even if he was sitting in front of him, ordinary people would not feel the slightest breath as long as they did not look up, as if he did not exist. Song Yu was not surprised by this, because Jia Yi was a death warrior trained by Kui family in Yuzhu since childhood, the most outstanding master in the family, just like Lao Xiao beside Su Buling, who could carry his master out of the sea of blood and corpses by himself. It's a pity that things are unpredictable. No matter how outstanding the guards and death warriors are, they can defend against people, but not against heaven. Jia Yi followed Queen Kui into the palace. Queen Kui had never been plotted against by the palace maids vying for favor, but she died of a heart disease. Even if Jia Yi had great abilities, what could he do? Gurgle gurgle. The two men sat opposite each other in front of the small stove, and the tea gradually boiled, emitting white mist. Jia Yi looked at the teapot calmly, and took a breath after a long time, his voice a little shrill. The prince called me here, is there something important? Song Yu brewed tea seriously, as casual and elegant as always, just reminiscing about the past. Reminiscing about the past originally refers to the exchange of reminiscing about the past between friends, but for Jia Yi, after the death of his master, all the past things were nothing meaningful except the unforgettable scars. Throughout the ages, those who are called true gentlemen are often villains. You and I are not friends. He. Song Yu was not angry at this offensive evaluation. The merits and demerits of people will be determined by future generations, and there is no need for you and me to worry about it. I asked you to come here today because I want to borrow something from you. Jia Yi picked up the teacup, ignoring that the tea was still boiling hot, and took a sip gently. What is it? Song Yu was silent for a moment, and said slowly, 10 years ago, the Iron Eagle hunting deer, Prince Su and the Emperor had a rift, and they have long been at odds with each other, and there is no friendship as before. Jia Yi's expression was calm. As far as I know, the Emperor has never expressed the idea of reducing the power of the vassal states. Song Yu shook his head. How can you guess the mind of a king? Last winter, the Prince of Su went to the capital and was ambushed in the Weha River area. He survived and escaped to Chang'an by chance, but was poisoned by the dragon-locking poison. Do you know Su Buling? Jia Yi thought for a moment. According to my adoptive father, the Prince of Su is a master of martial arts. If he is given time, he may be the best in the world. His talent is far better than mine. But his character is impulsive and bloodthirsty. He is too sharp and too strong, and it is easy to break. Song Yu nodded and sighed softly. He is an evil dragon among humans, but he is tied with reins. An evil dragon is an evil dragon. It will either break out of its cocoon and become a dragon, or break its halberd and sink into the sand. How can it tolerate others? Pulling the rope to drive. After Su Buling entered the capital, he has been secretly investigating the matter of the dragon-locking goo. He has been patient for a year. If he can't find any clues, he may have to take risks. Jia Yi frowned. What does the prince mean? Song Yu sat on the ground with his knees propped up, picked up the teacup and took a sip. Back in the capital, my brother, and Su Yu were as close as brothers, and Buling was also my nephew. Now that Buling is in a desperate situation, how can I, as his uncle, sit idly by? I gave him a message a few days ago, and I'm afraid he will soon find the case library, and then he will have to enter the palace. Jia Yi narrowed his eyes and looked at Song Yu carefully for a long time. The dragon-locking goo is the Holy One. Yes, the evidence is destroyed. Why not just kill Su Buling and cut off the roots? If he was not killed at that time, it would be difficult to avoid suspicion in Chang'an, so he could not be killed. Jia Yi took a deep breath and was silent for a long time before looking at Song Yu. Prince, what do you want to borrow from me? Song Yu tilted his head to look at the portrait in the peach forest, and sighed softly. Xiao Wan is weak in nature, but she is born stubborn. She is alone in the underworld. I am afraid she has been waiting at the Nahi Bridge for several years. I haven't finished my work yet, so I can't go down to see her. I hope you can go first and continue to protect Xiaowan. The cold wind blew, and the tea house became quiet. The long silence lasted for a long time, leaving only the puff sound of the tea boiling. After an unknown amount of time, footsteps suddenly sounded outside the courtyard, and a woman's anxious shouts came closer and closer. Prince! Prince! Prince Su is drunk and beating people, go and stop him, don't beat Master Xiao to a pulp. Song Yu stood up, raised his hand and saluted Jia Yi, then turned and walked out of the courtyard, following Song Yufu to Wenk Garden. In the courtyard full of peach trees, Jia Yi stood up and walked out of the tea house only after Song Yu left. Silently, he arrived at the painting table. The scroll was hung on a peach branch. A young girl in a silk skirt was trotting in the forest of peach blossoms, holding up her skirt. She turned back to reveal half of her face, with a little panic. "Who are you? Don't paint me, I'm angry." The echo echoed in his ears, as if he had returned to the peach forest in Yuzhu. Jia Yi walked closer, raised his hand and gently touched the scroll, looked at the signature of Su Danking in the lower left corner, and some memories came to his mind. Su Danking painted 3 paintings that year, one was hung in the imperial study, and the other was hung here. The painting that Su Danking was most satisfied with was taken away by the Kui family and given to the young lady who was waiting to be married. The young lady rarely went out and didn't care about things outside. She didn't know how great an honor it was for a woman to be painted by Su Danking. She just thought that the bad scholar was annoying, and he painted her running away, and painted it so beautifully. The young lady wanted to burn the painting, but fortunately he had heard of Su Danking's name, so he kept it after persuasion, and the young lady gave it to him. He was a dead soldier, with no property or family, and even no fixed residence, so he buried the painting under the peach forest in Yuzhu, and only he and the young lady knew about it in the world. The young lady should have lived in that peach forest all her life, and lived happily all her life, but it was the emperors and generals in this world who would not care about the thoughts of a girl. Jia Yi looked at the scroll in front of him, was silent for a long time, and whispered softly, "The emperor is not worthy of the young lady, but he put the young lady in a cage. He should go down and apologize to the young lady in person. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 104. The night wind is cool and cold, and the palace lanterns outside the wall are like daylight. In the old peach blossom garden, only the remaining white paper flowers rustled in the night wind. The white lantern swayed towards the stone pavilion where Queen Kui liked to stay, and the dim light illuminated a few feet in radius. The lounge chair was still placed in the stone pavilion, and there was a small couch next to it, which was neatly tidied up. There was a jade flute on the table. When Empress Kui was still here, Song Ji would come here every day, rocking on the recliner and playing popular tunes in the market. Empress Kui never smiled after entering the palace. She leaned on the small couch with her poems and books in her arms and ignored the emperor. No one knows whether Song Ji likes the queen, but whether as a husband or an emperor, he is almost impeccable. He behaves well and speaks rigorously just like in the court. However, Song Ji's poetry was not very good. It was too old-fashioned. It was neatly composed but contained emotionless words. It was not even considered a masterpiece. It could only be described as a pile of rhetoric. Queen Kui would not be happy about it. Now this man has passed away, leaving the whole garden desolate. Jia Yi wore a eunuch's robe and hung a lantern on the edge of the stone pavilion. He picked up the broom next to him and swept away some paper scraps on the ground. Day after day, year after year, I was supposed to guard the Rinzhen Palace all my life, but a sudden soft sound broke the tranquility of the winter night. Snap! The sound was rich and powerful, and it was the sound of breaking the wind caused by the warrior's surprise attack. Jia Yi's red robe suddenly bulged, and he swept his sword backwards. A figure had already volleyed in front of him. Su Buling moved forward silently in the dark night, but he exploded violently when he was only 2 feet away. His tight-fitting night clothes did not make any sound, but the sound of the punches could not be covered up by the wind. Worried about beating Jia Yi to death with one punch, Su Buling's attack was not too heavy. However, the speed of the opponent's reaction made Su Buling slightly stunned. I am afraid that this person is not far behind the mass murderer Zhang Xiang. Jia Yi is obviously a master of the inner world. He follows the path of being soft on the outside and strong on the inside. His moves are silent and seemingly light, but the force of the knife is extremely fierce. He just swiped a peach branch, and the peach branch as thick as his finger was broken silently. The paper flower was smashed to pieces. Su Buling was extremely cautious in this trip. The opponent was eunuch Jia's adopted son, so he would not underestimate his opponent. He changed his fist into a palm and used the Bagwazang method to catch the knife. The two palms met without making any sound, but they were suddenly separated. The direction of the hand knife. Jia Yi's eyes clearly showed some surprise. The opponent just punched using Tongbei fist, which is famous for its cold, crisp, and quick punches. It is considered a representative school of hard and fierce boxing. Bagwazang is completely opposite. It emphasizes using softness to overcome hardness and has many changes. From the force to the routine, it is completely different. On the other hand, the opponent can switch between hardness and softness smoothly. This adaptability alone is enough to crush 80% of the masters in the world. However, Jia Yi was selected as a dead soldier to protect Empress Kui by the Kui family in Yuzhu, and was adopted as an adopted son by eunuch Jia. He was by no means an ordinary person. After the knife in his hand was defused, Jia Yi's red robe bulged, his hands were like maggots attached to the bones, his steps were ghostly and forceful, and he stabbed 12 fingers in a row, directly reaching Su Buling's throat, eyes, heart, and other certain death points, which can be said to be a trick. Fatal. Whispering rustling. Jia Yi's hands were like snakes spitting out messages. Su Buling dodged and pushed away until he could no longer retreat to a peach tree in the back. Jia Yi suddenly turned his palm into a hook, yanked against Su Buling's wrist, and struck out with the force. The knife stabbed into Su Buling's heart. Su Buling missed the first blow and was at a disadvantage. After 12 consecutive blows, he was bound to retreat. At this time, he forcibly intercepted the knife in his hand and tried to retreat. His body also shook due to the pull, causing a flaw in the lower body. Without hesitation, Jia Yi changed his sword to an inch fist and hit Su Buling's palm 3 times in a row. Hearing 3 muffled sounds that were almost integrated into one, Su Buling retreated backwards. Thump thump thump. Su Buling took 3 steps in a row until he leaned against the peach tree to steady his body. His back was pressed against the peach tree, causing a lot of paper flowers to fall. Good work. Su Buling twisted his neck and wrist, rearranged his boxing stance, moved his feet forward and back, bowed like a tiger, and made a hook. Jia Yi stood upright in the peach blossom forest, wearing a eunuch's red robe, but it looked like he was wearing blood clothes. His arrogant aura was unmatched by ordinary martial artists. He also stretched out a hand to hook. Your Excellency is not bad either. It's just half successful. Su Bulenling took a breath. Due to the anger just now, the energy and blood in his body surged, and there was already a dull pain in his chest and abdomen. He could not continue to fight. If he delayed for too long and alerted the other secret guards, he would be in big trouble. Thinking of this, Su Buling's eyes were slightly cold, his knees were bent slightly and he stepped hard on the ground. He only heard a muffled sound of bang, and 2 small pits were forcibly stepped on in the frozen soil under the peach tree. His whole body was like he rushed out like a cannonball. Jia Yi's face changed slightly, and he raised his hand and quickly grabbed Su Buring's fist. But he never thought that the fist was caught, and the strength contained in it was inhuman. Jia Yi was hit by a punch in the palm of his hand. Before he could release the force, there was a crisp click sound, and his finger bones were broken. And this is just the beginning. Su Buling's body was still in the air. After hitting Jia Yi's palm, he grabbed Jia Yi's hand. His 5 fingers were like hooks piercing the flesh and blood of his palm. He pulled his body over and pulled Jia Yi over. Between the sparks of calcium carbide, Jia Yi raised his other hand to block, but he could no longer block it. Bang! Su Buling's right knee hit Jia Yi's chest as fast as thunder. The force was so strong that the back of the blood-red eunuch's robe was torn open, and the muffled sound of bone cracking was heard at the same time. Su Buling's hands followed suit, and between the rise and fall, his elbows hit Jia Yi's shoulders at the same time. Jia Yi's shoulders were obviously shorter, and his pale skin turned blood-red in an instant. He was knocked back by the impact of the knee. Jia Yi's arms were obviously useless. A battering ram-like knee strike was enough to make him lose consciousness for a short time. The moment his body flew back, he was pulled back by Su Buling. Ah! With a low groan, Su Buling raised his right hand high, and a powerful stone-opening hand hit Jia Yi's severely injured chest. Bang! Jia Yi fell vertically to the ground, and a mouthful of blood spurted out directly. The two fought in the blink of an eye, and it was as if Su Buling rushed out and hit Jia Yi, and Jia Yi was knocked back and fell to the ground. Originally, he was unscathed, but after landing, he was covered with bruises and could no longer move. As soon as Su Buling stopped, a mouthful of blood rushed up his throat, his eyes were bloodshot, and his body couldn't help but tremble slightly. The snowy night was quiet, and in just a few breaths, there were a few more footprints on the ground, one horizontal and one vertical, with 2 people, and paper scraps falling on the ground like withered peach blossoms. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 105. Who? The faint panting echoed in the peach blossom forest, barely audible. Su Buling, holding on to the pain of thousands of ants gnawing at his heart, sat on the ground and looked down at Jia Yi, whose face was still pale. I'll ask you a question and give you a quickie. Jia Yi lay in the peach blossom forest, staring at the white paper flowers above, without much pain on his face. After all, endurance of pain is the most basic quality of a dead soldier. Only those who have no feelings, no thoughts, obey orders, and are not afraid of death are qualified dead soldiers. Who are you? Su Buling. Su Buling could not have left anyone alive, so he did not hide his identity. Jia Yi coughed, it's true. I thought he was just talented, but I was wrong. Su Buling didn't say much nonsense, and said in a deep voice, in the spring of the 2nd year of Suan He, you were the head of the inner treasury. Did you communicate with the wolf guards to transport the dragon locking gu to the Tang family in Yuzhu? Jia Yi was silent for a while, looking at the peach blossoms above, and said in a flat voice, yes, in the spring of the 2nd year of Suan He, the Zhu family in Yuzhu refused to obey the court's control. The Tang family in Yuzhu and the wolf guards worked together to strangle the Zhu family. They were unable to match the old swordsman Zhu Zhoushan, and finally used the dragon locking gu. Su Buling frowned. Lao Xiao learned from the wandering sorcerer that the dragon locking gu appeared during the Iron Eagle hunting deer, and I'm afraid it was this time. Is the dragon locking gu still in the inner storehouse? I have long since stopped managing the inner storehouse, so I don't know. Since His Royal Highness has been poisoned, he will definitely not keep it in the inner storehouse. Whether it has been destroyed, I am afraid only the current emperor knows. Su Buling's eyes were slightly cold. How to detoxify? Jia Yi kept looking at the white flowers above, and was silent for a long time. The prince should ask the emperor. How can I, a eunuch, know? The peach forest became quiet, with only a faint breath left. Su Buling looked at Jia Yi's face, and suddenly asked. How did Queen Kui die? Jia Yi's eyelashes trembled, and he shook his head. Heart disease, do it, I am a dead man, I should have gone down to accompany the young lady, I have lived until now, and I have not had a day of sleep. Su Buling raised his gradually purple hand and rubbed his forehead, and waited for a moment. Jia Yi's bones were half broken, and his pain was no less than the outbreak of the dragon-locking goo on his body. When Su Buling was almost dying, Jia Yi did not say anything else. I hope you will be born into a good family in the next life. Su Buling whispered, and then there was a crisp sound of click. Jia Yi's eyes gradually became blurred, and he was no longer breathing. After Su Buling raised his hand and closed Jia Yi's eyes, he began to cough violently. With trembling arms, he took out 2 small bottles from his arms and poured pills into his stomach with strong liquor. Sweat soon soaked his clothes, and the bruises on his hands gradually faded. The night wind was slightly cool. About half a quarter of an hour later, Su Buling stood up shakily, walked to the pavilion to get a broom, cleaned up the paper scraps and a little blood on the ground, and filled in the footprints on the ground. During the fight just now, Su Buling had been paying attention to the surrounding environment. It was not difficult to recover now after killing him instantly with one move. After restoring the peach blossom forest to its original state, Su Buling carried Jia Yi's body and came to the Tei Lake in the north of the harem. He slid into the freezing cold water silently, found stones at the bottom of the lake and stuffed them into the eunuch's robe until the body could no longer float. He returned to the lakeside and washed off the blood on his body. After doing all this, Su Buling hesitated for a moment. Now that it has been confirmed that the poison was given by the emperor, the method of detoxification is probably only known by the emperor. As Jia Yi said, if you want to detoxify, you can only ask the emperor. But since the emperor has taken action, how could he help him detoxify for no reason? Even if the matter is made clear, the emperor will only deny it and will never spread such things that anger the border troops and damage his reputation. And asking secretly like tonight. Su Buling took a breath, and his eyes showed a bit of powerlessness. Only when the emperor is not in the harem, he will have the opportunity to sneak into the harem and kill Jia Yi. If he goes to find the emperor, the masters who are always guarding the emperor are not blind. They can surround the imperial study room by standing guard every 5 steps, making it difficult to sneak into it. And when Jia Yi's disappearance is discovered tomorrow, the guards in the palace will be alert. Even if they can't find the body and don't understand the reason, the guards around the emperor will definitely be much stricter. If he wants to talk to the emperor, the best opportunity is tonight. It will be more difficult than ascending to heaven in the future. Su Buling felt the condition of his body. It is impossible to fight with the masters again. The chance of success is too small. He has to go back to recuperate for a few days before he can take action. Thinking of this, Su Buling considered for a while and set off on his way home. The poison in his body clamped his throat. After recuperating, he will definitely come to the palace again. As difficult as ascending to heaven? Now is a desperate situation, better than having no way out. It was already late at night, and only the palace lanterns were swaying in the wind in the sparsely populated Changal Palace, and there was no one in the corridors and pavilions. Su Buling silently passed through the Qianbu corridor and returned to the Queen Mother's bedroom. He wanted to go directly to the side hall to rest, but in case someone came to check when he went out just now and leaked the news, he decided to check the situation first. The Queen Mother lived in seclusion in the deep palace. Because she had no children, there were not many people around her. There were thousands of buildings in the huge Changal Palace. It was inevitable that women would be a little scared to live here. Basically, they slept in the house near the Queen Mother at night. Su Buling walked through the garden and listened to the noises one by one. Most of the palace maids were already asleep, while some were on night duty or couldn't sleep, whispering to each other. He even met a pair of unfortunate lesbians, secretly hiding in the room to grind the mirror. Su Buling was not surprised by this. The palace maids lived in the imperial city for many years. The lower-level palace maids without official positions could only work day after day without seeing any hope for the future. As for the animal instinct of love between men and women, it was even more untouchable. Long-term sexual repression gave rise to the situation of eating together, which was very common. The Queen Mother's bedroom did not even have eunuchs, so they could only relieve their loneliness in this way. After Su Buling inspected the girls' dormitory, he did not find anything unusual. When he was about to leave, he saw that the windows of the Queen Mother's bedroom were still lit. Su Buling frowned slightly and looked at the sky. It was already 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Could it be that the Queen Mother is also here? With some doubts, Su Buling came to the window of the Queen Mother's bedroom silently, poked his finger through the window paper, and took a look inside. He was stunned when he saw it. The Queen Mother's boudoir is very different from that of an ordinary woman. It is luxurious and spacious. There are many more bookshelves in the room. The shelves are full of various objects, such as glass lamps, 7-piece grids, 9-piece links, etc., most of which are ingenious objects in the market. The room is very warm with a heater. The Queen Mother, wearing a nightgown and thin pants, sits at the table with her collar half open, revealing 2 golden carp embroidered inside. Su Buling has heard of the reputation of lotus hiding carp. The fabric tribute from Jiangnan is as thin as a cicada's wing, and there are 2 carp embroidered between the lotus leaves. When the couple exercises, it brings up waves, and the koi are like cruising in the water, lifelike, and the most elegant plaything in the boudoir. However, whether it is an ordinary carp or a golden carp, they are all exclusively provided by the royal family. Even the favored concubines may not be able to get them. Su Buling also saw it for the first time. The Queen Mother sat still and naturally could not appreciate the beauty of it. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not deceive in a dark room. Su Buling is not a gentleman, but he is not a dirty villain. After a startling glance, he turned his eyes away and looked at the table. There are various tools on the wide table, such as steel balls, tweezers, gold wire balls, etc. There are also pony and golden cranes made of splicing on it. The knowledge of the Huainan Xiao family is diverse. It is not surprising that the Queen Mother has nothing to do in the deep palace, so she studies these little toys. The Queen Mother must have been unable to sleep all night. At this time, she sat in front of the table, holding a piece of wood in her hand and patiently carving it with a carving knife, concentrating, with a smile on her slightly mature cheeks. The most beautiful thing is the eyes in front of the lamp. It is no exaggeration to describe this unusual scene as a painting. Su Buling took a quick look and couldn't see what the Queen Mother was carving, so he didn't stay for long and disappeared from the room without a sound. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 106. The next morning. The morning reading in Wen Kuiyuan had just ended. Song Yufa returned to the room with a stack of books, looked at the sky, and sighed slightly depressed. After the last visit to Mrs. Lu, there was still no news about Hairpin. It seemed that Mrs. Lu could not do anything to Prince Su. Tomorrow is the New Year's Eve, and the Imperial College has been on holiday for a few days. It will be the first month of the new year soon. If Dad accidentally asks, how should I explain? Song Yufa stood there and hesitated for a long time, thinking that she might as well try to apologize to Prince Su again. If someone makes things difficult for her, she will make things difficult for her. Anyway, it's not the first time. Su Shiza just talks and doesn't practice, and he doesn't really know how to do anything to her, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Thinking of this, Song Yufa gave herself a breath, put down her books, and walked towards the bell and drum tower. The Imperial College occupies a huge area. In addition to the various school buildings, there is also the Confucius residence at the rear. Imperial students admitted from other places and those from poor families also live here. Song Baking was born into a poor family and had a house in the capital. However, after becoming a priest, he lived in the Imperial Academy with no one else around except his daughter. Song Yufa was walking along the road, and when passing by a courtyard, she suddenly found the door open. I turned my head and glanced. The courtyard was full of peach trees, and there was a painting table in the middle. King Yan Songyu was sketching something with a brush. Song Yufu had been in Kuaza's prison for a long time, so she was quite familiar with the emperor's younger brother. Since the emperor of Yan ascended the throne 10 years ago, King Songyu of Yan did not go to Yuzhou to join the vassal state, but lived in the courtyard of the Imperial College. Because of his excellent literary talent and character, he has always been praised as a contemporary true gentleman. Song Yufu often met Song Yu, and she felt that the prince was very kind, much less pretentious than Prince Su, and no different from other princes, but she didn't know much about the others. Except for giving lectures to students, Song Yu stayed in this courtyard at other times. He had never been out of the Imperial Academy, and he had no maids or concubines around him. He spent all day painting, and could only use 2 frames of rice paper in one day. The painting Song Yufu has never been seen before. Song Yufu hesitated at the door. After all, the other party was the vassal king, so he couldn't just go and do some household chores, so he lowered his head and walked over cautiously. After wandering around, we came to the bell and drum tower, which was empty and empty. Song Yufu tightened her coat and skirt and walked outside the room below the bell and drum tower. She smiled tenderly and raised her hand to knock on the door. Dong dong. There was no response from the room. Song Yufu waited for a moment, thinking that Su Buling was annoying her. She couldn't help feeling a little sad, and said softly, "Prince Su." Still no response. Song Yufu knew that Su Buling was undergrounding. She went to the palace yesterday and came back last night, so she couldn't spend the night in the palace. "I'm in." Song Yufu couldn't wait for a response, so she pursed her lips and felt aggrieved, then raised her hand to push the door open. The bell and drum towers are just rooms facing the wall, not that there is nothing in them. Su Buling went out normally without opening the window, so it was naturally impossible to lock the door from the inside. He also didn't believe that someone dared to enter his room without permission, so the door was just closed casually. Squeak. Song Yufu entered the room meekly with her head lowered, closed the door again, then turned around and whispered, "Su Shizi, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have boiled you with porridge, but you are also wrong. How can you let your daughter's family feed you? It is unbecoming of a gentleman to bully the weak." He muttered and talked for a long time. Seeing no response, Song Yufu raised her head and glanced. A table, a plank bed, a chair, but no one. Huh. Song Yufu was stunned for a moment, and after a moment of reaction, she felt panicked. Sneaking into someone else's house is a trivial act. Song Yufu quickly turned around and prepared to run out, but when she closed the door, she felt something was wrong. She came in thinking Su Buletinling was ignoring her in the house, and those who didn't know were not guilty. Moreover, the bell and drum tower is a public place, not Su Buling's home. Anyone can come over in broad daylight, just like entering the school building. She is still half a wife. Thinking of this, Song Yufu felt a little more relaxed, and then thought of the hairpin that she had longed for. "Prince Su, will you put the hairpin in the house?" Song Yufu couldn't help but get entangled when she thought about this. It's unreasonable to sneak into the room. If you rummage through other people's things, no, the hairpin was hers. It was Prince Su who took it away by force. She has no choice but to take it back secretly. After making excuses for herself for a long time, Song Yufu finally took a look at the table and found only pen, ink, paper, and inkstone, so she walked to the bed and took a look. The bedding was folded into tofu blocks, the sheets were not wrinkled, and they were almost spotless. I really love being clean. There was some appreciation in Song Yufu's eyes, but it was impossible to hide anything in the scene before her. She hesitated, then knelt down, ready to look under the bed. Unexpectedly, just as I squatted down, I heard footsteps coming from outside and voices of conversation. "Little prince, how is the matter?" "It's a mess. Let's talk about it after the new year. How is Zhu Manzi doing? Didn't he cause any trouble?" The young prince should still worry about himself. He stayed out all night. With Mrs. Lu's temperament, this year may not be easy. "Oh, just get used to it." The voices of Su Buling and Lao Xiao. Song Yufu was shocked and immediately panicked. If Su Buling opened the door and found her there, he would not be able to escape even if he jumped into the Yellow River. The sound gradually approached, Song Yufu's mind went blank, and she looked around in panic. The room was empty, without even a cabinet, and there was nowhere to hide. Without thinking, she lay on the ground and rolled under the bed, pulled the hem of her skirt in, and covered her mouth tightly with her hands. Tap tap. The footsteps passed by the window, and then the door opened and closed. Song Yufu's heart trembled, and even her breathing was almost stagnant. She lay motionless, her head resting on something, looking sideways at a pair of boots walking into the room, swaying in front of her eyes, and finally the bedboard sank slightly and sat in front of her. Song Yufu was almost crying in a hurry, and she dared not move, just feeling that every moment was torture. She silently chanted in her heart, "Get out quickly, get out quickly." Just thinking of Su Buling's house arrest, Song Yufu felt a little desperate. With Su Buling's dull and cold personality, it would not be surprising for him to stay in the room for 10 days or half a month. Wouldn't she be discovered sooner or later? No. Dusk. Song Yufu remembered that the students in solitary confinement had to ring the morning bell and evening drum every day. As long as they could make it to dusk, when Su Buling went up to the bell and drum tower, they could run out. Thinking of this, Song Yufu secretly breathed a sigh of relief. All she had to do next was stay still. Looking at the boots in front of her, Song Yufu suddenly felt a little moved. She was a little curious about what Master Su did when he was alone in the room. Su Buling would not talk to himself when he was alone in the room as long as his brain was not wrong, but he could not help moving. Song Yufu waited for a while, and then saw Su Buling put his legs up, but he did not lie down. He should be sitting cross-legged to regulate his breath and practice. Okay. Song Yufu blinked, and immediately lost interest. She lay there stupidly and waited quietly. Unfortunately, good fortune never comes alone, and misfortune never comes alone. After waiting for only half a minute, another round of conversation came from outside. "Hey Madame Lu, why are you here? If you want to see the young prince, just ask the servants to call him." "Where is the prince?" "In the house." Song Yufu was stunned for a moment, and for some reason the words "catching an adulterer" popped up in her mind. Oh no. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 107. In the early morning, Su Buling waited for the palace gate to open, then said goodbye to the Queen Mother and left Changle Palace. The Queen Mother's attitude has changed drastically now. She is not just a heat-clearing person. She asked him about his health for a long time, and personally sent him to the palace gate before going back. He was a little overwhelmed. Moreover, he saw the lotus-hidden carp that only the emperor could see last night. To be honest, he was still guilty and ran very fast. Jia Yi's disappearance in the palace city has been discovered, but Jia Yi is one of the secret guards. He is a master who is elusive. It is impossible to determine Jia Yi's whereabouts in a short time, and it has not caused too much trouble. Although Su Buling's bloody battle last night was short, the price he paid was not small. The cold poison in his body was severely backlashed, and he was a little floating when he walked. His face was slightly pale, just like overindulgence. He had to go back and recuperate for a few days. Su Buling took a carriage back to the Imperial College. After discussing the clues he had obtained with Lao Xiao, he returned to the room under the bell and drum tower alone. After closing the door, he sat cross-legged on the bed, calming his breath and concentrating his mind. Meditation requires emptying the mind and thinking of nothing. Su Buling did not notice anything unusual. After about half a quarter of an hour, before he entered into meditation, Mrs. Lu's voice sounded from outside. Su Buling suddenly had a headache. He raised his hand and rubbed his face a few times to make his skin look rosy, and then stood up. Squeak. The door was pushed open without knocking. Mrs. Lu walked in hurriedly. Her hair was a little messy, probably because she didn't tidy it up carefully when she went out. The Imperial College was very large and she couldn't ride a horse or a car. She walked in a hurry. There were a few beads of sweat on her mature and beautiful cheeks. She was not in a good mood and her eyes showed a bit of fatigue. It was obviously because she didn't sleep at all last night. Mrs. Lu finally let go of her worries after seeing Su Buling. Her nervous expression disappeared and she became unhappy. She put her hands on her waist, glanced at Su Buling, and turned her face away. Lao Xiao made an expression of helplessness outside the door, and then left on his crutches. Su Buling smiled awkwardly, stood up, and closed the door. Aunt Lu, why are you here? Mrs. Lu's clothes rose and fell, and she took a few breaths. She couldn't say what she had been holding back all night after seeing Su Buling. After a long silence, he finally sighed. Ling your father asked me to take care of you. You were not seen all night. If something goes wrong, how can I explain to your parents? Su Buling smiled awkwardly, raised his hand to support Mrs. Lu's arm, and sat down on the plank bed. I went to the palace last night. Didn't I say hello to you in the afternoon? You stayed at the Queen Mother's place last night. Su Buling felt a little strange when he heard this, and thought about it for a while. Of course, I drank too much last night, so I slept in the side hall all night. Did the Queen Mother arrange a maid to serve you? Mrs. Lu frowned, folded her hands on her legs, and glanced at Su Buling. It was obvious that she used great restraint to stay calm. Rightward arrow. Rightward arrow. Su Buling was really a bit overwhelmed, shook his head and chuckled. How is it possible? The Queen Mother is an elder, she is not that absurd. Besides, even if the Queen Mother arranges it, I don't like several palace maids sleeping alone. Mrs. Lu was half believing and half doubting, silent for a moment, and suddenly turned her head to Su Buling's chest and smelled it. The faint fragrance of orchids was intoxicating, as if lying in his arms. Su Buling raised his hands, a helpless smile appeared in his eyes, and he also sniffed Mrs. Lu's hair. How about the perfume I bought yesterday? If you like it, I will buy more next time. Mrs. Lu did not smell the scent of the foxy woman, so her expression eased a little. She raised her eyes and looked at Su Buling, poking him with her fingers. You, just don't listen to me. I'm not stopping you from finding a woman. Men are full of blood and it's natural for them to like women. But men must also be clean. As the Prince of Suwang, only girls of pure birth can match you. Those palace maids usually, anyway, they are not worthy of you. I'm doing this for your own good. I know, I know. While speaking, Su Buling raised his hand and pressed Mrs. Lu's shoulders. With a little force, he pressed Mrs. Lu down. Mrs. Lu was stunned, instinctively raised her hands and curled them in front of her chest, looked at Su Buling, but did not say anything. Her eyes were full of panic and confusion. Su Buling let Mrs. Lu lie down, and then pressed her legs diligently. Are you tired from walking just now? In fact, just ask the servants to come and call you. The legs were very soft, and they were obviously tense at this time, and they were pressed together. Mrs. Lu leaned on the quilt and looked around. The doors and windows were closed and no one could see, but it was still a bit weird. Many words were also forgotten by this interruption, so she had to raise her hand and gently push Su Buling's arm. No. I'm not tired. The voice was a little trembling. Su Buling kneaded and pressed with an experienced technique, smiling. Linger has always remembered how Aunt Lu treated me, so how could she lie to Aunt Lu? I just didn't want Aunt Lu to be frightened, so I hid from her. Mrs. Lu's legs felt numb, and she twisted uncomfortably for a few times. Gradually she got used to it and said nothing more. Her cheeks were flushed and her expression was dignified and peaceful. Humph, you just talk nicely. I'm not your real aunt anyway. You might forget me after you leave in 2 years. Forget it, just forget it. When I die of old age, just burn some paper money for me. Su Buling's eyes were full of helplessness. He kneaded and twisted from bottom to top. When I leave Beijing, I will definitely take Aunt Lu back to Ziliang for a visit. If Aunt Lu doesn't leave, I won't go back either. Where can I go? Mrs. Lu muttered absent-mindedly, secretly staring at Su Buling's hand, and then looked at Su Buling's eyes. Su Buling's eyes were pure and flawless, and naturally there was no evil thought. Mrs. Lu gradually relaxed, and couldn't find a topic, so she cast her eyes into the empty room, looked around a little, and suddenly frowned slightly, sniffing the air. Linger, why is there the fragrance of Osman thus in the room? It's exactly the same as the one on Miss Song. Su Buling was a little puzzled, and followed Su to smell it. After smelling it, Su Buling's expression froze. I often come into contact with Song Yufu, and the fragrance on Song Yufu is light. After a long time, I got used to it and it was difficult to notice it. At this time, after Mrs. Lu's reminder, I found that there was indeed a faint fragrance in the room. Song Yufu came here a few days ago. Nonsense. Mrs. Lu sat up, her eyes full of suspicion, and looked around a few times. Xianzhi's incense powder is made of exquisite ingredients, and the smell is very light. Let alone a few days, even a few hours will dissipate the smell. She must have just come. Su Buling blinked his eyes, puzzled. Really? It's early in the morning now, and I just came back not long ago. Could it be that Miss Song came to see me just now? Mrs. Lu pinched the corner of her skirt, and her heart was in turmoil again. She looked around in the empty room, and finally moved her eyes to the bottom of the bed, ready to bend over to take a look. Su Buling's face changed drastically. The portrait of the Empress Dowager was still placed underneath. If Mrs. Lu saw this, it would be useless even if she broke her legs. Aunt Lu, there's nothing to see under there, it's dirty. I'll go shopping with you. Su Buling supported Mrs. Lu's arm to prevent her from bending over to check. But Mrs. Lu was suspicious to begin with. Seeing Su Buling's reaction, her heart trembled and she felt wronged. You hid Miss Song under the bed. Su Buling shook his head quickly. How is that possible? Why would I hide her under the bed? Then why didn't you let me see it? Su Buling opened his mouth and was about to confess the matter of the beauty painting, when a cough suddenly sounded in the room. It seems that the floor is a bit cold. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 108. Cut. The voice was very low, and it was obvious that he was trying to restrain himself, but in a room with only a man and a woman alone, it could be described as thundering in the daytime. There was a deathly silence in the room for a moment. Su Bulenling's expression suddenly froze, and he was immediately confused, then stunned and shocked. Mrs. Lu was stunned, her mature cheeks gradually showed an incredible look, she bit her red lips and looked down, tears suddenly coming out of her eyes. You actually. Hold. Su Buling nearly spit out a mouthful of old blood. He stood up, rubbed his forehead, and walked around the room. Even though he had all kinds of tricks and rhetoric, he couldn't find a word to describe it at this time. What is this mess? Song Xiapifu, are you trying to kill me? Mrs. Lu was half resentful and half aggrieved. She pinched the hem of her skirt tightly, leaned down beside the bed, and took a look inside. Under the bed, Song Yufu, who was wearing a coat and skirt, curled her hands on her chest and was already crying. Seeing Mrs. Lu's complicated eyes, the two of them stared at each other for a long time. Song Yufu forced out a coy smile. Mrs. Lu, what a coincidence. Mrs. Lu was too lazy to respond. She sat up straight and looked at the wall, her beautiful face showing the calm before the storm. Rustling. Song Yufu got out from under the bed with difficulty, looked at Su Buling who spread his hands and was dumbfounded, and then looked at Mrs. Lu who was sitting next to her with her mouth pursed and saying nothing. She slowly lowered her head, wishing to find someone. Drill into the hole. Su Buling, no matter how cold-tempered he was still furious at this moment. He raised his hand and nodded. Song Yufu, why are you here? When Mrs. Lu saw that Su Buling was so fierce and was preparing to question a girl, she felt even more angry and stood up. I also want to ask you, why is she here? How do I know why she's here? Are you mean to me? Mrs. Lu looked at Su Buling with astonishment in her eyes. That's all, I don't care about you anymore, I'm disturbing you. This time she really cried, Mrs. Lu choked with sobs, turned around and walked out. Su Buling panicked. He had never seen Mrs. Lu feel so wronged before. At this moment, he quickly grabbed Mrs. Lu's wrist and forced himself to apologize. Blame me, I was wrong, your child knows my mistake, please forgive me. You're right, it's me who's wrong, I shouldn't care about you, just let go. Mrs. Lu twisted her shoulders and struggled, pear blossoms were raining, she gritted her teeth and forced her hand out, and glared at Su Buling, you are busy with your business. I'm going back. Don't come to see me in the future. After saying that, she ran out of the door. Aunt Lu. Su Buling was at a loss. Just after he had taken a few steps to catch up, Mrs. Lu said angrily. If you follow me again, I will crash to death here. The voice was so heavy that Su Buling immediately didn't dare to chase after him. He hesitated to speak and was about to cry. He could only go back to the house first and deal with the troublemaker before talking. It's just that Su Buling had just returned to the house and had not yet gotten angry at Song Yufu who was huddled in the corner. The sound of tap, tap, tap dash came from behind. Looking back, Mrs. Lu ran away again holding up her skirt. Return. Su Buletinling looked happy and said quickly, Aunt Lu, this is all a misunderstanding. Let's sit down. Get out of my way, I don't have a nephew like you. Mrs. Lu angrily pushed Su Buling away, ran into the room, squatted down by the bed, raised her hand and pulled out the painting box underneath. It is evident that a woman is attentive. Su Buletinling slapped his forehead and leaned against the wall, feeling that he was hopeless. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Lu opened the box, unfolded the scroll and glanced at it, nodded, closed it and put it back, picked up the painting box and ran out of the door again. Aunt Lu. Get out. I don't know you, ask the Queen Mother to go. Su Buling stood at the door, looking at Mrs. Lu's back, and was speechless for a long time. I originally thought that this year's New Year's Eve would be difficult, but now it seems that next year's New Year's Eve may not be stable. I'm afraid this will be remembered for a lifetime. In the small room, Song Yufu leaned against the corner softly, her fingers mingling together, her face turning red and white. Watching all this, she knew she was in big trouble. Mrs. Lu must have thought that she and Su were in contention. If this spread, putting aside the fact that the news has spread, whether you can get out alive seems to be a question. Su Shize. After Song Yufu murmured in a mosquito-like voice, she bit her lower lip and thought for a long time, but she didn't know how to explain it. Bang! The door slammed shut, making Song Yufu tremble in fright, and said quickly, "My father is in the Imperial College." "You still have the nerve to mention your father?" Su Buling's face was cold. He glanced around, took the paperweight from the table, waited for a moment because it was too thick, threw it aside, turned around and walked to the corner. Song Yufu quickly stretched out her hand. "I was wrong, I won't dare to do it next time." Su Buling was condescending and his eyes were cold. "Don't you like to reason? Let's go over what happened today. If you can't explain the truth clearly, don't blame me for being cruel." Song Yufu lowered her head, looking pitiful as if she had done something wrong, and whispered. "I came here in the morning and thought you were in the house, so I opened the door and came in." "No. Those who don't know are not guilty." "Okay, then why didn't you leave when you found out I wasn't here?" I want to find a hairpin." "Haha, you even learned how to steal things." Song Yufu was anxious and her face suddenly turned red. "No. That's my hairpin." Su Buling nodded. "Okay, then why did you hide under the bed? Are you planning to stab me in the back?" "Congratulations, you succeeded." Song Yufu pursed her lips, and it was obvious that Su Buling was very angry, and her voice became weaker. "You are back. I was afraid that you would find out, so I hid under the bed. I wanted to sneak out when you went out, but Madame Lu came. This time it's my fault. I'm unreasonable. If you want to hit me, hit me." Su Buling rubbed his forehead. "Auntie, what's wrong with me coming back? Can't you come out earlier?" "I was afraid that you would hit me." "Then why are you not afraid now?" "I can't hide now." Su Buling opened his mouth, held it for a long time, and finally his face turned cold. "Take off your clothes." Song Yufu panicked immediately, hugged her clothes, and shook her head vigorously. "Madame Lu will be even more angry if she knows." "You are not stupid." Su Buling was stunned. He paced back and forth in the room several times. He felt a nameless fire in his heart that he had nowhere to vent. He gritted his teeth and said, "Then how do you compensate me? Apologizing is useless. Forget it." Song Yufu shrank in the corner and said hesitantly, I promise not to cause trouble in the future." Su Buling sneered, "You have caused trouble. What trouble can you cause?" "It's hard to say." Su Buling clenched his fists tightly and held back his anger. After a long time, due to the anger and the pain from last night, she couldn't breathe smoothly and coughed violently while holding her chest. Cough cough cough. "Ah!" Song Yufu was so scared that her face turned pale. She ran up in panic and hugged Su Buling, holding her up with all her strength, crying. "Su Shize, I was wrong. I didn't mean to make you angry. Don't die. Get out." Su Buling's head was buzzing. He raised his hand to push Song Xiaopai away, but his body couldn't bear it anymore, so he just shook his hand. Song Yufu used all her strength to push Su Buling to the bedside and sat him down. She took the wine gourd with an anxious look on her face, opened the cork and put it in front of Su Buling. "Drink quickly." At this time, Su Buling just wanted this devil to get out quickly, and he was not willing to drink the wine she handed over. He gritted his teeth and glared at Song Yufu, signaling her to disappear immediately. But Song Yufu saw that Su Buling was about to vomit blood in anger. Why should she drive him away? Su Buling didn't want to drink. She didn't know what she was thinking. She raised her hand and poured a big mouthful of wine into her mouth, then held Su Buling's face. The four lips touched, and the cool wine slid into his throat. Su Buling's eyes were wide open, full of disbelief, and he even forgot to struggle. This is too much. The small room seemed to freeze in an instant. Song Yufo held Su Buling's handsome cheek, and she came back to her senses at this time. She blinked her big eyes, and her face gradually became as if it was on fire. She didn't dare to move. After an unknown amount of time, Su Buling's eyes turned cold and he turned his head away. Have you kissed enough? Song Yufo raised her hand and wiped her lips, her face red as if bleeding. She stood up weakly and whispered. I'm sorry, don't tell my dad. Yeah. Song Yufo felt relieved, smiled awkwardly, and ran out in a panic. Su Buling leaned against the wall in silence for a moment, raised his hand and touched his lips that were a little painful from being bitten, frowned, and muttered. This silly girl is really hopeless, her kissing skills are too poor. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 109. Tang Hulu. Selling coal, don't hit me. The streets were bustling with people. It was already New Year's Eve. The streets were full of dragon and lion dance teams. Brilliant fireworks rose in every corner of Chang'an City, lighting up the majestic capital that had just been shrouded by the night. Chang'an City has a population of 1 million. Most of them go back to reunite with their families at the end of the year, but there are always some wanderers who are away from their hometowns, either traveling around or preparing for the imperial examinations. On New Year's Eve, they can only wander around the streets, looking for the taste of the new year that has accompanied them since childhood. The Sun family shop in Qingxi Lane never closes all year round. At this time, it naturally becomes a good place for wanderers to warm up a pot of wine and reminisce about the past. The only pity is that there are only 3 wine tables, and they are gone when they arrive late. Many people came over and saw that there was no seat, so they had to order a pot of broken jade shao and left in disappointment. At this time of year, shopkeeper Sun would serve more side dishes. He would chat and laugh with the customers in the shop, and drink 2 taels of wine, and he would have a comfortable and good year. In the small wine shop, the yellow wine banner was swaying. Leaning against the wine table in the corner, Zhu Manzi held a wine bowl that was a little bigger than her face, gulped and sipped, a little listless. In the past, during the new year, my mother would make a lot of delicious food, it was so lively, oh I really want to go home. There were 2 days off before the new year, and Zhu Manzi changed into a small jacket and pleated skirt commonly seen in girls' homes, and her hair was combed very delicately, just like a newly grown girl next door, well behaved and cute. Ning Qingyi sat opposite, still dressed as a man of the underworld and wearing a bamboo hat. Hearing the voice, he said calmly, people of the underworld are like this. If you live through today, you may not have tomorrow. You live by the day, not by the year. Traveling in the underworld is often a matter of life and death. This is also true, but it is inevitable that it is a bit unlucky to say it on New Year's Eve. Zhu Manzi put down the wine bowl, rested his chin on his arm, and looked at the foxy girl in front of him. Xiaoning, you grew up in the Taoist temple since you were a child. Doesn't that mean you can't even see a man? Ning Qingyi frowned slightly. Taoist nuns are not nuns. Taoist priests have men and can get married. Besides, I went to Changqing Temple when I was 8 years old, and I used to stay in Shu. Zhu Manzi tilted his head and made small talk, is Shu fun? I heard there are a lot of delicious food there, and I haven't been there yet. Ning Qingyi replied after thinking for a while, he shook his head gently, I have been living in seclusion in the mountains with my mother since I can remember, and we celebrated the new year every year. Later, when the Iron Eagle was hunting deer, Zhang Xiang came with the wolf guards and chased me along the way. My mother sent me out of Shu, and I was rescued by the people of Liudang and sent to Changqing Temple. I can't remember much about my childhood. Alas poor. Zhu Manzi sighed faintly, raised the wine bowl and wanted to clink it with Ning Qingyi, but Ning Qingyi ignored him and raised his eyebrows slightly. You have caught a dozen little thieves, earn a lot of money, right? Zhu Manzi's listless face froze, sat up straighter, eyes flickering. Well, it's my duty to eliminate harm for the people, silver and so on, are all monthly salary. Ning Qingyi snorted lightly. You changed into a new dress, and used perfume powder that only rich ladies would use. With the salary of the government office, I'm afraid it's not enough. He. Zhu Manzi blinked, took out a small box of rouge from her arms and put it on the table. If you didn't say it, I almost forgot that the government office rewarded some silver, and I also bought you a box of rouge. Ning Qingyi pushed the rouge box away with the scabbard, his eyes flat. I should help you work hard, you should know the rules of the rivers and lakes. We are like sisters, mentioning silver hurts our feelings. Who is your sister? I am your sister. Oh no, you are my sister. Zhu Manzi began to pretend to be drunk vaguely, and fell on the table and fell silent. Ning Qingyi took a breath. It was New Year's Day, so he finally gave up the idea of taking action and ate his food. The night was getting darker. The two people who were far away from their hometown seemed to have to spend New Year's Eve outside. Ning Qingyi grew up in the dojo. In addition to revenge, he was actually quite interested in the prosperous Chang'an market. He wanted to wake up Zhu Manzi, who was pretending to be drunk, and go for a walk on the street together. Suddenly, a conversation came from the alley. This is the wine shop. It is very famous in Chang'an. Many seniors in the martial arts world have been here before. Humph, I heard about this place from my master before. When I went to find a liar to help with painting, I came here from afar and bought a pot of good wine to send over. As a result, the liar used the excuse that there is no beauty in the world like painting and went back on his word. Ning Qingyi frowned slightly and looked back calmly. Outside the small wine shop, 4 people dressed in exotic clothes walked together. The leader was a woman in red, leading a white camel, with a thin veil covering her face and a hat, and her figure was very outstanding. Shopkeeper's son naturally heard this conversation, looked at the 4 people curiously, and said in a friendly manner, "Miss, are you talking about Su Danking, the playboy? Alas, that kid never keeps his word. When he was entangled by someone, he asked the girl to run to buy wine, and then he disappeared after returning. Who is your master?" I, the old man, may still remember. The 4 people paused, obviously showing some caution. Zhongli Chuchu and Huyag were just talking casually. Seeing that shopkeeper's son was talking, in order to prevent exposing his identity, he just said casually, "Shopkeeper, I don't know him, give me a pot of wine." Shopkeeper's son didn't ask much when he saw this. There are always inconvenient times in the martial arts world. He shook his head and chuckled while drinking. Zhongli Chuchu felt that this place was not suitable for staying for a long time. After taking the wine pot, he quickly left son's shop. After Ning Qingyi looked at the costumes of several people, and recalled a little, she stood up and left the wine shop with her sword in hand, and followed them. Zhu Manzi, who was lying on his stomach pretending to be asleep, raised his head at this moment. After making sure that Ning Qingyi was gone, he breathed a sigh of relief. When he stood up to pay, he saw shopkeeper's son looking strange and asked curiously, "Old man's son, do you know the woman in red dress just now?" Shopkeeper's son chuckled, "I don't know, who is your friend's master? You must have heard of it, right?" Zhu Manzi had gotten a lot of words from Ning Qingyi in the past few days, so he naturally nodded. "Genren Tukiu, I heard that he used to be a big fox, a beautiful woman who was originally going to be a queen. She escaped from marriage and was hunted down. Out of the house. Shopkeeper's son sighed, being a monk and being protected by the Taoist family can avoid the pursuit of the court and the Tang family, but it cannot avoid the jealousy of Beiwakundi. I hide in Changqing Temple every day and dare not even leave the door. There are also people who come to stir up trouble. Zhu Manzi became curious about these gossips. He blinked his big eyes and said, "Oh, it's so pitiful. Xiaoning will probably be the same in the future. Now he doesn't dare to show his face when he goes out. That's natural. The words heavenly fragrance and national beauty are the same as number one in the world, which is not easy to win. But Miss Zhu definitely doesn't have such troubles, so she doesn't need to worry about it." Zhu Manzi nodded, but felt something was wrong for a moment, and said with wide eyes, "Shopkeeper, why are you swearing?" "Ha ha." Shopkeeper's son curled his li. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 110. Brilliant fireworks were set off outside various mansions in Chang'an. The wealthy families who usually had strict upbringings were a bit more relaxed. Kuishao Street was full of children running with fireworks and accompanying maids. Prince Su's mansion was decorated with red lanterns, and Su Buling gave Lao Xiao and others a day off. Lao Xiao and the others prepared a table of wine and food, and sat in the main hall to exchange glasses, which was regarded as the New Year's Eve. As for Su Buling, this year is obviously not easy, even a little difficult. After being caught in bed the day before yesterday, Su Buling could not see Mrs. Lu again. Before the cold poison in his body could be suppressed, after recuperating in the house for a day and a night, he hurried to Jinghua Yuan to comfort Mrs. Lu. Mrs. Lu found Song Yufu under Su Buling's bed that day, and then dug out the portrait of the Queen Mother from under the bed. You can imagine her feeling. It was okay for Song Yufu, after all, she was mentally prepared to be lost for a few days at most, but the portrait of the Queen Mother was different. Madame Lu thought that Su Buling had been hiding from her all day long, but he hid the portrait of the Queen Mother under the bed, and would bring it out every night when everyone was quiet. Mrs. Lu was really sad. She felt like a cabbage that she had cared for a year had been dug up by someone. The cabbage didn't want to see her. If the maids hadn't stopped her, she would have returned to her parents' home that day. Under such circumstances, Su Buletinling would naturally not be able to trap her when he came to the door. Calling her aunt would not answer her, and pretending to be cute would not work. She stood alone outside the other courtyard, waiting all day and night and not being allowed in. Su Buletinling was helpless. Seeing New Year's Eve approaching, it would really be next year if he waited any longer. After pondering for a long time, he had to wink at the maid who was blocking his way. Mrs. Lu felt sad, and the maid was also frightened. She quickly ran over to listen, nodded, and ran out. After a while, Lao Xiao ran over with a cane and shouted from afar, "My young prince, Miss Song is here and asked if you have time to go out to the Lantern Festival. Do you want her to go back or?" Su Buling straightened his clothes and said loudly, "Song Yufu, right? Well. Your Majesty. The meal is ready, come in and eat." The effect was immediate. A gentle voice sounded from the courtyard. Mrs. Lu walked out of it, dignified and quiet, as if she had just heard the conversation. "Miss Song is here? No, you can go if you want. You don't have to eat." Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief and waved to Lao Xiao, "I don't have time, let her go back." "It's an order." Lao Xiao chuckled, picked up his crutch and ran away again. Su Buling stepped forward with a smile, held Mrs. Lu's arm, and said softly, "I'm not a kid, so why are you running around during the Chinese New Year, right Aunt Lu?" As soon as Lao Xiao left, Mrs. Lu's demure expression disappeared and turned into a cold look. She pulled her arm away and refused to be supported by Su Buling. "I promised your father to take care of you. You have to cook the New Year's Eve dinner whether you eat it or not. Alas, the Queen Mother lives in the palace. Today is the Emperor's family banquet and I can't invite you in. Otherwise, why would you run to me? Sour. Su Buling only felt a toothache and held Mrs. Lu's wrist. The Emperor's family banquet, why should I go and join in the fun? Even if the Empress Dowager asked me, I wouldn't go. What happened last time was a misunderstanding. Mrs. Lu twitched her hand, but did not pull away, then stood still. She did not look at Su Buling, but just snorted lightly. You just continue to lie to me. Anyway, I can't do anything to you, and I can't control you. If you bother me as an ant, just tell me, I will stay away from you from now on, and I won't disturb you and Miss Song Huaqian you down. How is that possible? Su Buletinling smiled gently and pulled Mrs. Lu in front of him. Aunt Lu, be good. Stop making trouble, it's really a misunderstanding. Mrs. Lu blinked her eyes, then her face turned red, and she raised her hand and slapped Su Buling on the shoulder. No big or small, I am your aunt, it was you who was naughty. Who misunderstood you? I saw it with my own eyes. Is it still false? Su Buling nodded with a smile and explained, Song Yufu ran to my room to hide in order to find the hairpin. I really didn't hide her under the bed. If I like her, I can bring her over to show Aunt Lu. Look, Aunt Lu will not object to Shu Dolly, so what am I hiding? Mrs. Lu took a breath and her clothes bulged a little. Don't you and Miss Song have nothing? Su Buling opened his mouth and was forced to kiss once. It didn't seem right for him to say it was innocent. For a moment, he could only look at Mrs. Lu helplessly. Mrs. Lu narrowed her eyes slightly and turned around. Hey! Aunt Lu, it's nothing, you have to believe me, if I lie to you, I will stew myself in an iron pot. You slave, go boil the water and boil it. Okay ma'am. Su Buling was speechless for a moment, nodded, and reluctantly followed Yunu to the kitchen. After all, Mrs. Lu doted on Su Buling. Seeing Su Buling's disappointed look, she couldn't help but tilted her head and sighed softly. That's all, come back. I can't care less about my concubine at such a young age, is she the only one? Su Buling turned around and walked back, saying sarcastically, not a single horoscope, not a single one. No matter how uncomfortable Mrs. Lu felt, her words could not be more serious. I could only nod my head at the moment. You can figure it out yourself, what's going on with the portrait of the Queen Mother. Su Buling helped Mrs. Lu walk and said seriously, last time I went to the palace, the Queen Mother asked me, who looks better, her or the portrait? Mrs. Lu was stunned and turned her head in disgust. She can even ask this? It's really, ugh. Su Buling shrugged, I am a junior, and the Queen Mother also asks Yao Ting, but it's actually nothing. What did you answer? I said she looks good now, but not before, it was just flattery. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly and nodded, no wonder she gave you the painting, the Queen Mother might have been impatient before, and often took out the painting in front of me, saying that she was the 8th best in Suan He. I didn't catch Su Danking, otherwise it's just a painting, what's so strange about it? She said it nonchalantly, but the jealousy in her words was obvious. After all, everyone loves beauty, and a woman who can be the best in her generation with her appearance is something she can only be proud of. Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, and walked into the house with Mrs. Lu, it's just a painting. When the weather is good in the spring, I will accompany Aunt Lu to the outskirts of the city, and I will paint a picture for Aunt Lu. Su Danking is nothing, just a wanderer. When Mrs. Lu heard this, her eyebrows suddenly became more lively, and she folded her hands on her waist and glanced at Su Buling. Buling, can you paint? If you can't, you can learn, as long as Aunt Lu doesn't dislike it. Mrs. Lu said and her expression became more natural, How could I dislike it, as long as it's your painting? Well, Su Danking, I burn the painting of Su Danking. Ah dash. Su Buling's expression changed. Just when he was about to ask, he found that Mrs. Lu pursed her lips slightly and was about to feel wronged again. He quickly changed his words, it's just a painting. What's the big deal? At most, the Queen Mother will hate it for a lifetime. Mrs. Lu saw Su Buling's frightened look, laughed, raised her hand and pinched his face. I'm just kidding you. If I burn Su Danking's painting, I will be criticized by those literati. Su Buling breathed a sigh of relief and smiled very obediently. I want to hang it in the house and frame it. I will say that you gave it to me. If the Queen Mother knows, she will definitely ask me for it. I will let her ask you to see if she is embarrassed to ask. It's better to burn it. No big deal, frame it, I'll do it.